Prologue. Philip had always hated this part. Tucked away in a cave, alone with his thoughts, haunted by the image of his brother's disappointed face out of the corner of his eye. Once he had walked past the bones and masks of the previous Golden Guards, he would open his book and retrieve the ingredients to create a new grimwalker. It seemed like he was almost out of Selkidamas scales. He would have to kill another of those monsters. Maybe he could get this grimwalker to do it for him. He had almost mastered the creation at this point. He wished he didn't have to. If Philip's brother, Caleb, hadn't been so drawn to the sin of this realm so naturally, maybe the first clone would have been his golden guard forevermore. Maybe Caleb himself would have joined him, instead of lusting over a hellbound witch to a point where Philip just had to kill him and save his soul. He pushed the thought out of his mind, finishing up burying his creation. Philip sat down at his desk, flipping through the dusty journal's pages before finding an empty page. He started writing. I wish Caleb's sin would stop corrupting my grimwalkers. The 36th Golden God, Thorn, decided to get in my way. He was one of my best creations. He was one of the strongest magic casters I'd seen, even from a young age. I had, however, grown tired of his objections. I had presumed him loyal, but it seems he had been rebelling behind my back. When he finally started complaining of me, I lashed out, attempting to remind him of his place. Unfortunately, I had misunderstood my strength. However, I had no remorse for my actions as Thorn lay dying. His bubbling gasps and groans were more annoying than anything. He bled out on the throne room floor, sputtering blood out of his mouth and the gash on his throat. Yesterday, I told Lilith I was going on a trip to commune with the Titan. When I tell them that I go to the Titan's skull to discuss who make the next Golden Guard, they believe me. Most importantly, they stay out of my way. I am making my next Grimwalker. I am not keen on waiting for the child to grow up, but the Day of Unity is only a little over 16 years away. If I push him hard enough, he will be fit to take the title by the time it comes. Most of my Golden Guards last into their early 20s. 16 years will be easy. Thorn had lasted quite a while, much longer than the others. I might as well pretend that this one is my blood and raise him in the castle. I hope that he will be the last of these damn things I have to make. I spent hundreds of years giving him to others in the castle to raise. Thorn, for example, had been given to a general until he was old enough to be a scout. I'll pretend that this one is my own, a nephew, maybe. Hopefully, nobody will ask questions about Caleb. That fateful day, the Day of Unity, will be the moment I will complete my duty to God as a witch hunter. So, that will be his namesake. I will call him Hunter. Philip left the ink to dry, rubbing his temples with his fingers. Titan. It was a literal headache to make new Grimwalkers. This wasn't even the most irritating part. He wasn't sure how long he had drifted off for, but he was rudely awakened by the obnoxious wailing of a newborn child. He cursed under his breath, standing up and walking over to the planter. He leaned over, not even bothering to soothe the crying baby. Welcome to a sinful world, Philip hissed. Let's see how long you last, Hunter. Chapter 1. Hunter was a toddler when they found out that he had no bile sac. He had asked the head of the Abomination Coven, Darius, how he was able to create glowing circles by just lifting a finger. Darius had laughed it off, but Hunter had not realized that there was a concerned look in the Coven head's eye. Soon after, healing Coven members had come to poke and prod at him. Many scouts, Coven heads, and other workers tried to get him to make magic circle, but to no avail. Hunter had remembered the angered look in his uncle's eyes. Belos had just sighed, saying that it was no big issue, he would just take him under his wing. But Hunter remembered the odd look. It was probably nothing, Hunter had thought. Hunter was 4 the first time his uncle hit him. He had been babbling about birds. He liked birds. He loved watching them fly by from his window. He had found books in the library about birds from the human realm, and couldn't wait to tell his uncle all about them. There are chickadees, which are named after the sounds they make. Hunter, not right now. I read about blue jays. I'm working. Just go to your... And pretty red birds called cardinals. Hunter, shut up! Hunter had to take a moment to realize what had happened. The pain started swelling from the top of his head where his uncle had struck him with his hand. Hunter didn't do anything. He froze, shaking. He didn't realize what was happening. Why had his uncle hit him? Surely it was an accident, right? Uncle Belos loved him. That's why he had taken Hunter in after his parents died. That's why he said he'd train Hunter himself when he found out that the kid had no magic. He surely didn't mean it. He was just having a bad day. Hunter was sure of that. He walked out of the room silently. Belos said nothing to him. He walked out of the throne room quietly, not addressing the scouts guarding the outside of the door. He waited until he was alone before he broke down sobbing. He didn't even know why he was crying. It was an accident after all. It wouldn't happen again. The next day, everything was back to normal. Hunter had woken up for training. He was a prince, after all, and he was old enough to grasp a concept like battle lessons. Of course, he had been trained differently because of his lack of bile. He was started in physical combat earlier than most. At least that's what he was told, and Hunter always did what he was told. He had been training for a little while like this, and he hoped he was doing well. He wanted to be the best for the Boiling Isles, for the people, for his uncle. Sometimes, when he was alone in his room, he would sit down and close his eyes. He would sigh and clasp his hands together. His uncle had said that the Titan could hear everyone's prayers, said that you could repent for your mistakes, ask for guidance. So Hunter would pray. Sometimes Hunter would ask the Titan for what he wanted most, magic. He was afraid. Uncle Belos had taken Hunter under his wing. Uncle Belos had said that it was to be expected, that their family had been powerless witches, and that Hunter had simply inherited the gene. Uncle Belos had told him that he would give him a second chance of power, should Hunter choose to stay by his side. But what if it didn't work? Would people shun him? Would he be cast out? Would he get to keep the title of prince? Sometimes Hunter asked the Titan about what he wanted to know about his dad. Hunter had never known his dad. He didn't remember his mom either. He had always remembered living in the palace. He couldn't imagine being anywhere else. That didn't stop him from being curious. Uncle Belos said that Hunter's parents had died from wild magic with the rest of their family. Hunter believed him. He had no reason not to. After all, his uncle would never want to hurt him. That day was just a bad day. Everyone has bad days. Hunter was 4.5 when he got sick. He had been vomiting all morning. He had vomited before, and usually it was no big deal. He would return to training as soon as he could stand. Something about that day had been different. That morning he was throwing up bile in succession, certainly in no shape for battle training. Reluctantly, his uncle had agreed with the healing coven to let him skip one day, just one. He'd be back in the courtyard tomorrow, no matter what, with double the hours to make up for lost time. Hunter had stopped retching a little before noon. He felt cold, even with a thick blanket wrapped around his small body. He'd read all of the books in his room and started to grow bored of watching the sky outside his window. Hunter grabbed his blanket, putting it on like a cape, and making his way out of his room. He decided to wander into the throne room, where his uncle was talking about some higher-ups in the castle, along with some other coven heads. Hunter wasn't interested in what they were talking about. He was only interested in making his way to the throne, sitting next to it and playing with some rocks that he had found. Darius had been talking when he finally noticed Hunter beside the throne. "Why, hello, little prince. Trying to be more like your uncle." Hunter looked up and smiled. The Emperor looked over at Hunter. Whether the sound he had made at the little boy was a laugh or a scoff, Hunter didn't know. Hunter didn't mind. Hunter was too small to care. "I thought you were sick, Hunter. You're supposed to be in your room," Belos said coldly. "I was bored. I wanted to watch." Emperor Belos seemed to be taken aback by Hunter's words. "I see. Well, don't be a distraction. I'm working." Hunter nodded and went back to playing with rocks. He tried to listen in every so often, but did what he was told. Hunter always did what he was told. Eventually, Hunter noticed Emperor Belos stand up, walking towards the doors. Hunter, though still weak from malaise, got up and ran after his uncle. "Where are you going?" "To my study." "Can I come?" "Shouldn't you be resting in your room?" "No, Uncle Belos, I want to be with you." The Emperor stopped walking, looking down at the small child who met him with a big, hopeful stare. He had not seen such brightness in magenta eyes in years. He growled to himself and continued walking. Hunter took that to mean he was allowed to follow. Hunter had been in his uncle's study before. Whenever he had nightmares, he would make his way to the office with a blanket and sleep under the desk. Every morning he would wake up back in his bed, tucked in tight and comfortable. He wasn't tall enough to see anything on the shelves or desk, so there wasn't much for him in there. He sat next to Belos on the floor, watching his uncle work. The Emperor paid no attention to him, his gaze solely focused on the items on the desk. Hunter continued watching, but started to feel shivers back his body. His eyes started to feel heavy, and he nearly started gagging again. He started to feel dizzy and barely registered strong arms picking him up and holding him close. When he started to come to, Hunter realized that his uncle had put him on his lap, wrapping one side of his cloak over the child's small body. Hunter, still shivering, accepted it, leaning into the warmth of Belos' chest. He fell asleep soon after. The next day, he still didn't feel well enough to train. However, Hunter did not complain. He went out to the courtyard and did what he was told. Hunter always did what he was told. Chapter 2. Hunter was 5 when he had the dream. It was of a man. In the dream, it was dark. There was no setting. There was only a man. The man turned around. He looked a bit like Hunter. He had the same short, ash-blonde hair, the same dark, bushy eyebrows. He even had the same forelock hanging in his face. Hunter blinked at the man. He looked sickly. He had sunken eyes and cheeks. He had a tight frown on his face. The most startling of all, Hunter realized, was the jagged knife stained with red blood hanging above the man's head. "Are you my dad?" Hunter had whispered. Before any response could be given, Hunter was startled awake by a loud knocking on the door. Oh no, he had slept in too late. He had to get dressed, get armored, grab his staff. Hunter ran through the hallways, dodging various legs and decorations. He nearly tripped down the stairs when rushing to the courtyard. He stumbled outside, tripping and falling into the gravel. The scout turned around, and his beady black bird eyes watching Hunter get up from his fall. "You all right there, kid?" Hunter's cheeks and ears turned pink. "I was, practicing my dodging." "Don't sweat it, sir. I've tripped on that step a couple times myself." "You're new, aren't you?" Hunter asked. He did not recognize the scout's voice or stature. "Yep, but still hand-picked to train the Emperor's only nephew." The scout paused. "Well, more like I'm the only one who volunteered." "What does that mean?" Hunter snapped, offended. "Well, Your Highness, a lot of scouts are too nervous to be one of your trainers. God forbid something happened to you under our supervision. The Emperor will probably have our heads, if not our statues." The soldier shrugged. "Nobody wants to displease him either. When he found out about you ordering your old trainers to let you play in puddles." "I was foolish. I don't do that anymore," Hunter yelled. He remembered the way his uncle had scolded him for acting like a common infant. "If you can stand, you should be training," Belos had yelled. "There is no time for play. If I hear word about any more childish behavior, I'll—" Hunter shook himself of the memory. "Well, I'm Steve." The scout did a short bow. "And you're Prince Hunter." Hunter nodded and grabbed the wooden training stick. Steve stopped him. "You won't be needing that one today. I'm here to teach you to fly on a real staff." Hunter visibly perked up. His head was racing the entire time, trying to soak up Steve's instructions. Finally, Steve handed Hunter the staff, and the prince did everything he had been told to do in preparation to take off. He stepped over. His breathing started speeding up. He gripped the pole below his head. Tears started welling up in his eyes. He assumed the proper stance. His heart was beating fast. Faster, faster, faster. "Your Highness, are you all right?" Hunter could barely hear Steve's questions over his heartbeat and gasp. He felt Steve place a hand on his shoulder and guide him to a place to sit. As soon as Hunter realized what had happened, he'd burst out sobbing. Steve let him cry, rubbing the kid's back as he sobbed. Hunter's chest was tight with tension, and his heart felt like it was going to explode from how fast it was beating. He was scared. He was too scared to fly. Belos was going to be so mad. Hunter, still crying, looked up at Steve. "Please don't tell my uncle," he choked out. "Please, please don't tell him." "Hey now, it's all right. I won't say a thing," Steve assured him. "I understand, you know. It's a lot at once. How about you let yourself calm down, then we'll try again. This time we'll plan on just hovering a little bit over the ground. I'll be right by your side just in case you lose your balance." Hunter calmed his sobs and sniffled, nodding. After a minute, Hunter stood up and let himself get back on the staff, took a deep breath, and nodded at Steve. "I'm ready now." "All right, sir. I'll be right here," Steve assured him. "Remember, the Emperor had the staff made with our official magic. Do you remember what I told you with how to take off?" Hunter nodded. Steve nodded back. Steve held up his arms in the ready, just in case Hunter were to fall, and the prince lifted up his feet up as the red gem started glowing. He tried to hide the shaking in his arms, but kept his grip. "Well, look at that. You're a natural," Steve said happily. "You'll be confidently flying around this courtyard in no time. Titan, I bet you'll be the best flyer your age by the time you're a scout." Hunter felt a little better after that. Started looking forward to flying lessons with Steve. The new scout wasn't mean to him, didn't push him into threats, didn't force him to do anything. He never told his uncle. Belos would definitely fire Steve if he found out how soft the training was. He ran out into the courtyard. That wasn't Steve. Not Steve, another trainer of his, explained that Steve had been called away on a mission with Lilith, the head of the Emperor's coven. Hunter let out a small sigh of relief. "All right, hop on. Let's see what you can do." Hunter did what he was told. Hunter always did what he was told. He had gotten quite a bit more confident at flying, no longer feeling panicked when going higher than 6 feet or going faster than a walking pace. So he went ahead and started his normal course. "Faster," Hunter did. "Faster." Hunter swallowed hard but obeyed. "Faster." Hunter always did what he was told. Zap! Hunter was 5 1/4 when he first teleported. He was also 5 1/4 when he nearly teleported into a wall. He fell off the staff, breaking his collarbone, spraining his ankle, and getting a minor concussion. He sat up, dizzy and disoriented. One moment he was flying towards the tree. The next he was face to face with the wall behind the tree. He stumbled a bit as he was led to the healer, limping the entire way. He didn't really understand what was happening as his trainer kept a firm grip on his shoulders, trying to keep him upright. He had been sitting on the infirmary bed with a healing sigil on his neck and an ice pack on his ankle when his uncle walked in. He ordered the scouts to wait outside and removed his mask. Hunter blinked to clear his fuzzy head. It might have been the concussion, but was that pride in his Emperor Belos' eyes? "I hear you teleported, Hunter." Hunter nodded, ignoring the throbbing in his head while he did so. Belos sat down on the end of the bed, watching Hunter carefully with his piercing blue eyes. "Tell me exactly what happened. The healer said your concussion wasn't that bad, so tell me everything." Hunter hummed and thought. "Well, my usual flying trainer was off on a mission, so there was another. I was doing my usual course and I decided to start taking it faster. When I started getting into it, all of a sudden there was a zapping sound, and I was in front of the wall instead of the tree. When I tried to stop before I crashed, I fell. That's all." Hunter studied his uncle's face, noticing a twitch in the corner of his mouth. Was he smiling? "Well, we'll have to add that to your training. You're doing well with this staff. I hope you inherit it with pride." Hunter beamed. "Thank you, Uncle. I won't disappoint you." Belos looked over his shoulder, a colder look flashing in his eye. "You better not." Hunter tucked himself in, deciding to rest his head in hopes he felt better for training tomorrow. His uncle might be proud of him. Proud. He could barely sleep with all the pride running through his veins. He would be the best scout in the Emperor's coven had ever seen. He'd show them. Hunter was 6 when his uncle first drew blood. He had been sneaking into the restricted library whenever he had downtime. He liked to read. There was so much information waiting on paper pages. Once the books in his room had bored him, he moved to the Emperor's library. Once that had bored him, he slipped into areas nobody was supposed to enter. Lilith had found him multiple times, picking him up like a sack of potatoes from his reading spot and placing him outside the door, patting his head sarcastically and continuing her work. He had always found a way, though. Eventually, Lilith must have told Belos of his nephew's transgressions. Hunter had been wandering around the throne room when his uncle's voice had pierced the air. "Why have you been sneaking around this restricted part of the library?" Hunter looked over and blinked. "I was curious. I wanted to learn about those cool things." "They're not cool, Hunter. They're dangerous. You should not be reading about wild magic or anything else in that library." "But I want to know what I'm up against. I want to know how dangerous it really is. Do you not trust my word?" "Of course I do, Uncle Belos." "Then why is this so important?" "I want to help your curse." Belos froze, and Hunter walked towards him. He might have been young, but he knew about his uncle's affliction. He couldn't tell what his uncle was going to do next. Was he angry? Proud? I thought that if I learned about it, we could harness wild magic for ourselves, use it safely. For our own... Hunter heard a scream. It was his own. He was gasping, hurting, crying. The stinging pain in his ear kept growing into an agonizing ache. He touched his neck. It was wet. He looked at his hand. It was red. There was blood dripping down his neck, down his chest. He scrambled up and started running out of the throne room, desperately trying to get away. His uncle said nothing. Not even a sound came out of his mouth. Hunter ran through the hallways until he finally gave in, slumping against the wall of the hallway and sobbing desperately. He was shaking, barely able to breathe. There was so much blood, so much more than he had ever seen before. He was panicking, not knowing what to do. "Little Prince?" Darius came around the corner, searching for the sobbing boy. When his eyes laid on Hunter, this shaking, broken child, he ran over. "It hurts," Hunter sobbed to the coven head. Hiccuping, his tears streamed down his cheeks. "I know, little one, I know." Darius conjured up a magic circle, and a blob of abomination goo flew at Hunter's ear, encasing the wound. "This will help stop the bleeding. Up, up, quickly!" Hunter was still crying, but let Darius take his hand and help him up. He was led to the healers, not able to stop his tears as the magic did its work. Felt Darius rub his shoulder as the cartilage tried to stitch itself together. He heard the healers start speaking as they worked. "I can stop the bleeding and close the wound, but the notch in his ear will be permanent. I don't know what happened, but he's lucky. If the gash had been half an inch higher, the entire half of his ear would have come off. It's still got the strongest part of the cartilage. It should be normal when healed." He was finally grounded with a shocking start as a cold, wet cloth was rubbed against the dry patches of dark red, cleaning him of the blood that had dripped down his neck. "Stop," he complained. "I can do it myself." "You're only 6, Darius said sternly, picking up another cloth with magic and wiping Hunter's tear-stained cheeks with it. Hunter spent the rest of the day in his room. He was silent, staring in his face. He had acted like a fool, crying over a bit of blood. If he couldn't handle this, how could he be a soldier? He was useless. Hunter was 9 when he became a scout. Most of the other recruits were teenagers. He didn't pretend like he didn't notice. He noticed all right, but he knew he was probably one of the most capable on that mountain. The snow was up to his knees, and he could barely trudge through the storm. He had to march his knees as far as he could get them to even get a step in. He had to get to the bottom. He wanted to see his uncle with a proud look on his face again. He had been slowing down when someone had angered the monster on the mountain. He had read about it before. It was called a slither beast, a yeti-like creature that was a terrifying predator when provoked. Hunter watched in morbid apathy as the recruit was grabbed with a scream. Nobody cared to save him. From what Hunter had read, he would be stuck in the thing's den until it decided to eat him. Hunter realized that he would not be able to outrun the slither beast. He was small, even for his age, and he was the youngest there. He was a sitting target for this thing. He was not going to let this monster take away everything he worked so hard for. He looked around to formulate a plan. That was when his pink eyes focused on some orange wildflowers. Sleeping nettle. Perfect. Hunter whirled around and pointed at a recruit with feline-like features. "You!" he yelled, grabbing the flowers. "Set these on fire!" The demon blinked. How old are you now? The scout looked confused, but did as told and lit the tips of the petals aflame. Hunter pulled his shirt up over his nose as to not breathe it in, running up to the creature. He waved it around as it burned more and more, producing a sleep-inducing smoke and catching the monster's attention. Hunter dared to get closer, making sure the slither beast breathed it in. He knew his quick thinking was working when the beast dropped the recruits it was holding and started stumbling around. Hunter, noticing that the flowers were almost burnt out, threw them at the beast as it fell over. Immediately he ran, trying to trudge through the snow that was half his height. He started feeling hot, wanting to take his cloak off, but he knew what was happening. He read about hypothermia before. He kept his cape on. He had fallen over into the snow when he realized how weak his body had become. He couldn't find the strength to pick himself up. He failed. He was going to die here. He'd been a failure of a nephew. What would Belos think of him now? He weakly shut his eyes and clasped his hands together. Mighty Titan, please, 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 I don't want to die here. I don't want to lose everything I've worked for. Please. Oh, Titan, get up, he heard a voice say. He felt another layer of fabric fall over his shoulders. He blinked his eyes open and saw the demon from earlier. Come on, kid, she said. I have fur. I'll be fine without it. Up, come on. We can't be far now. With little resistance, she heaved him over her shoulder and continued down the mountain. Why are you doing this? Hunter argued. You're supposed to leave me behind. Because you're an infant and it's fucked up that you're even here. I'm not an infant. I have every right to be here, Hunter snapped, kicking weakly at her as she walked. I didn't train my entire life in a castle courtyard to be treated like a child. But you are The demon suddenly dropped the boy with a shocked look on her face. You're the prince? Hunter blew the dangling strand of hair out of his line of eyesight. Who else would I be? He growled. The demon blinked at him in shock. Does the Emperor know that you're here? Hunter raised an eyebrow. Of course. He ordered me to come here. The demon gave a quiet, oh, okay. But Hunter saw the concerned look in her eyes. He, told you to become a scout? At 9 years old? The prince shrugged. And? The demon laughed nervously. Right. Anyway, we're almost down. Can you make it on your own? Hunter nodded, trudging ahead. He overheard the demon muttering to herself. Damn it, Severine, why didn't you join the tiny cat coven? They probably obey child labor laws. Hunter was nearly frozen to death by the time he made his way to the camp. He mustered all of his strength and ran to the campfire, shivering and nearly crying. He didn't cry, though. He wanted to be strong. He started to lose consciousness. Whether it was from his hypothermia or from pure exhaustion, he didn't know. He felt coven members pick him up as they returned to the castle. He was treated to a warm bath. It felt more like he was swimming in the boiling sea than a nice soak. He was dressed in dry, warm clothes, and the healing coven went to work on his frostbitten fingers and feet. He was dizzy and barely conscious when he stood in front of his uncle, but he still had the sense to beam with pride. Even the Emperor allowed a smile to creep on his own face. I'm proud of you, Hunter. Hunter was shaking on his feet. The Emperor was proud of him. Hunter had made his uncle proud. Lilith stepped forward, and Hunter lifted his wrist towards her, bracing himself as she lowered the branding glove onto his skin. It burned, but Hunter didn't flinch. He stared down at the golden triangle on his arm with curious pink eyes. He did it. He was a coven scout. All of that effort he had put into everything had finally paid off. Thank you, mighty Titan, he prayed silently. Thank you. Hunter was 10 when he became the Golden Guard. He remembered the way they fastened his leather chest armor to his already small frame too tight. Too tight, too tight! Quit your whining, Bella scolded. If you weren't so skinny, it wouldn't be loose, and the servants wouldn't need to cinch it so tight. Maybe he wouldn't be so thin if he was fed more than rations for grown men, Darius had growled to himself. He had been irritable all day. Hunter pretended like he didn't hear the snarky comment, allowing Darius to continue measuring him for some costume piece or whatever. He remembered the way his cape dragged along the ground like a fancy dress because it was too big for him. Don't complain, Belos had snapped. You'll grow into it. It's going to get dirty, a servant pointed out. Let Darius pin it up until he gets taller. Hunter pretended like he didn't see Darius bristle. Something was obviously bothering him today. he decided not to ask. He remembered how his uncle had shoved the hood over his head roughly, covering his ears. "Hood up," Belos had commanded. "I don't want everyone seeing that notch in your ear." Hunter had started to argue. "But everyone knows that I have a notch in my..." He stopped talking with a start as the Emperor squeezed his shoulder violently, shooting pain through Hunter's arm. He remembered what it felt like to put the mask of the Golden Guard on for the first time. Despite everything that had happened on putting his armor on, despite all of the bickering and bad looks shared, he felt pride. He felt overwhelmed with pride. Only 10 years old, and he was the Emperor's right-hand man. He walked swiftly and proudly towards the throne, watchful eyes staring at him from the aisles. They were all here to see the new Golden Guard appointed, and that was him. That was him, Hunter. He remembered how happy he felt when he was handed his staff. He had learned how to fly, cast, and teleport with the thing, but he was never allowed to have it outside of training. As a scout, he only had a spear. He took it with a firm grip, walking forward and kneeling at his uncle's feet. Felt the Emperor's staff rest against both of his shoulders, his head spinning in excitement that he could barely hear the words being said. He was Emperor Belos's right-hand man. Chapter 4. Hunter was 10 and a half when he got the scar on his cheek. It wasn't his fault. His soldiers didn't respect his authority. They never listened to his orders, all because he was 10. He knew what he was doing. He was the Golden Guard for a reason. "You're the Golden Guard because you're the prince," Olaf had snapped at him once. "I know hundreds of scouts that would be a better choice only after all the generals." Hunter was always upset when people said that, but right now he wasn't Hunter. He was the Golden Guard. "Am I hearing you right, Lady Lilith?" the Golden Guard teased coolly. "Are you questioning the choices of not just my uncle, but the Titan himself? I'm sure Emperor Belos wouldn't be pleased to hear of such sacrilege from his very own coven head." Lilith's ears pinned back as an angry look spread across her face. You... Careful with your tone, Lady Lilith. Don't forget who you're talking to." Lilith went to respond, probably to scold him, when a coven scout turned the corner and bowed before saluting them both. "Golden Guard, sir. The Emperor wants you to meet him in the throne room for a report on your latest mission," the scout said hurriedly, not breaking formation. "Thank you. At ease. Return to your duties." The prince nodded, not addressing Lilith as he twirled his staff and teleported through the hallways towards the throne room. He was let in as soon as he flashed in front of the door in a brilliant red. He stepped in to find the 2 generals that had joined him on that mission, his uncle, and that annoying demon Kikimora, who had always hated him for no reason. "Welcome, Hunter." Hunter felt a shiver move down his spine. It was almost more threatening when Belos had no venom in his voice. He bowed before moving to his place in front of the throne. He let his cape settle around him to hide the way he was nervously twiddling his thumbs. He was appreciating the hood, as it kept everyone from seeing the nervous flick of his ears whenever his uncle started speaking. The Golden Guard was supposed to be scared, especially if the Emperor is himself. "Is it true that you were not able to bring any criminals into the conformatorium?" "No, but we did..." "Hunter," Belos snapped. "It doesn't matter what you did. You failed my instructions." "It's not my fault. Nobody listened to my..." "It doesn't matter," the Emperor boomed. "Make them listen. You are the Golden Guard." Hunter bowed his head, not daring to talk again. He listened to the general's reports, butting in when necessary. He started to feel safer as the report went on. Maybe his uncle would let him go without a cuff to the head this time. He'd prefer it that way. He hated having to deal with a bruise for the rest of the night. He let out a silent sigh as Belos dismissed them with a wave. Hunter turned on his heel and started to walk out, but Uncle's voice rang out, making his ears pin to his head. "Hunter, stay." He turned around, kneeling. He knew what happened next. "Kikimora, leave us." The red demon bowed, walking out of the throne room and closing the door. If Hunter knew Kikimora, she would still be listening in on the other side. He didn't move or speak, though. He waited for his punishment. "Stand up, Hunter." That wasn't expected. Hunter did as he was told. Hunter always did what he was told. "If a mission fails, whose fault is it?" "Mine," Hunter responded. "I'm the commander. The problem comes from me." "Right." Belos removed his mask, standing up. "So don't you dare imply otherwise, especially in the presence of others. You make me look bad, Hunter." "I'm sorry, Uncle. I didn't..." "Being sorry doesn't solve anything. Discipline does. You know that." Just get it over with, Hunter whispered, going to kneel again, expecting a smack to the head. Stand up, Belos yelled. Take off your mask. Hunter swallowed hard, slipping his mask off and holding it at his side under his cloak. He looked into Belos's blue eyes and waited patiently. Before he could blink, the Emperor lashed out with a green tendril, striking Hunter's jaw and leading up to his cheek. Hunter gasped, feeling blood drip onto the shoulder of his cloak, causing a large red stain. He put his mask back on and bowed before leaving, not making another sound. Sure enough, Kikimora was waiting on the other side of the door, not realizing that Hunter had been leaving. He glared at her from behind his mask, not daring to take it off, and revealed to her that he had been struck. A lot of witches seemed to dislike that, which Hunter never understood. It was just discipline, after all. Playing Scout, Kiki, or were you listening into the Emperor's private conversation? Again. Kikimora glared at him with rage. She had always been jealous of him. If she wanted to be so close to the Emperor, maybe she should have tried being his nephew. Something she never seemed to understand. It is my job as the Emperor's assistant to follow his orders, and he said to leave us alone, Hunter snapped, eyebrows furrowed under his mask. What happens when he doesn't want you there is none of your business. I think it's my business when I'm trying to figure out why the Emperor hired a child. I deserve to be here. I worked that hard, Hunter screamed, finally breaking. He whirled around, but immediately realized his mistake when Kikimora's mismatched eyes widened at the sight of the growing red stain on his ivory cloak. He had a million thoughts fire off in his head at once before he turned around and ran off, fighting his feelings down. It finally tipped over when his adrenaline died down and it started to hurt. Hunter tripped over his own feet, throwing off his mask to hold his hands over the wound as he started sobbing. Nobody found him this time. He tried to stop crying, he really did, but he just couldn't be the strong Golden Guard right now. He cried until it felt like his lungs and stomach were going to come out of his mouth. In fact, he retched right there, his bile mixing with the blood dripping on the floor. That's what finally grounded him, hating the sight of it. He twirled his staff and cleaned it up with a flash, grabbing his mask and staggering up to see Hetty and the other healers. He refused to tell them any details as he took off his armor and pulled down his sleeve. He just demanded that they heal it as fast as possible so that he could get back to work, even if it was left scarred. He was done in time for lunch, opting to leave his armor and cloak for washing and making his way to the Scouts' canteen in just his dark tunic and leather armor. He heard muttering from other coven members as they noticed the fresh scar on his cheek, but he held his head high and paid no attention to their gossip. He took his rations and sat down, alone, as normal. He was not well liked amongst Coven Scouts. They found his orders bossy and his voice annoying. They especially disliked his promotion. He was 10, after all. Most Scouts were adults. Steve was always nice to him, but today he was nowhere to be seen. On another mission for Lilith, Hunter supposed. He liked to listen, though. Since nobody talked to him, he got most of his news through eavesdropping. I still can't believe they made that kid the Golden Guard. We haven't had one in 11 years, and the Titan chooses a 10-year-old? All because he's the prince, no doubt, another scout sighed. I think I would be a better Golden Guard. Could you imagine me in that mask? Absolutely not, the first soldier laughed. But if I was the Titan, I would have picked you over the prince. He's gotten way too much attention. Now he's just a brat. Kid doesn't even have magic. What a waste. Half of which Hunter, I'll say. Ha! Good one. Hunter, had he been in his right mind, would have stood up and coolly walked up to the two and confronted them. But right now, he just poked at his rations and decided to leave them there, sulking all the way to his room. He lay there, curled up under the blanket as he tried not to cry for a second time that day. Half of which Hunter. Is that all I'm ever gonna be? Hunter Was a Child is a multi-chapter fic on AO3, written by me, Losercat, as a part of the Golden Blood AU. If you're interested, the link will be down below. Thank you for watching.